You are now watching Zaclasage, the best place to learn about competitive Pokemon TCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin' YouTube? Welcome back to the channel, Zaclasage here. Today we're going to be going over the best Brilliant Stars decks in April this week. So we've had Sao Paulo Regionals go on, we had a bunch of in real life Pokemon TCG events on the Play Limitless platform, and a bunch of online events on the Play Limitless platform. Those have all contributed to changing up this week, and this week's shaken up a little bit. I'm looking at my list right here, and I'm like, yep, it's changed up a lot. So stay tuned for a great list of decks with all updated deck lists. So you can peep those deck lists in the comments below. They're going to be in the pinned comment with reference videos for most. If there's not a reference video for it, I'm probably working on it. But if you have any requests, let me know in the comments below. Put your guess for the top 10 best decks below. Let's spark a discussion. I totally want to chat with our community a little bit more, and that'd be absolutely a great way to do it. Hit that subscribe button, notification bell, all that good stuff. You know what I'm saying? Let's get to 11,000 subscribers. That'd be absolutely amazing. And of course, if you are trying to build up any of these decks, you can always go to ptcgostore.com, plug in code ZEALOSAGE5 to save 5% on your next order of codes. You can go to atlastcg.com, plug in code ZEALOSAGE8 to save 8% off your in real life Pokemon TCG singles. And you could go to metafy.gg/@Zaclasage. I can teach you how to play a little bit more about the game or help you grow as a player with my coaching. So hit me up today. I'd totally love to help you on your Pokemon journey. That being said, let's jump into our number 10 spot. We got a lot of great things going on. Let's get it. Galloping all the way into number 10, we have access to Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX with Inteleon. The goal of this deck is to be using Melanie, searching that out with Shady Dealing Drizzile to accelerate energies to Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX, and you can either hit with Ride of the High King, or you can hit with Max Lance. Max Lance just recently got a buff from Brilliant Stars, so you can use Choice Belts to already add to that 250 damage to knock out things like Arceus V-Star, so you're now doing 280 for 2 energies. And of course, if you need to do a little bit more, we have access to Quick Shooting Inteleon, and we have access to Leon to be able to hit those bigger numbers to knock out things like Mew VMAX and Mew VMAX or Arceus with a big charm or anything else like that. Ice Rider is not necessarily the best deck in the formats. Obviously it's not, it's at number 10, but it is one of those kind of like neutral picks that's always like a solid choice. It might not be the best choice, but you're also not losing every single game. So if you're looking for a middle of the road approach where you're kind of like in the game at all times, I'd roll with this deck. Otherwise, I'm sure there's a lot of decks that have a lot more solidified matchups higher up. I think that this deck is probably appropriately placed within the top 10. It could be a little bit higher, and I don't necessarily think we're going to see this one drop out of the top 10 for the foreseeable future, but we've had crazier things happen. We'll see exactly how it goes. Single striking its way into number 9, and dropping from number 6 last week is Single Strike Urshifu Umbreon Box. I do want to admit that this is a deck that probably shot up a little bit too high. I mean, a lot of it has to be the way that I'm doing these rankings. So I've combined all single strike variants into this build, excluding Gengar. So if there's just like a single strike Morpeko deck or an Umbreon Morpeko deck, I decided to put it under the single strike umbrella. So that's how this is going to be. There are lists that play more Stonjourners, more Morpekos, stuff like that, but the whole goal is to be using single strike Roar onto Umbreon, single strike Urshifu, Morpeko, whatever techs you have, and really try to roll your opponents. I do find that this is the most successful build for me, so that's why it's probably placed so high, but it doesn't necessarily even have to include Umbreon or Single Strike Urshifu VMAX. I think that Single Strike decks have kind of crumbled into this is exactly the best way that I put it. Like, it's all turned into a big toolbox of ideas that you could attack with. So, interesting that it shot up to number 9, and that this is the build that I went with. That being said, you're part dark, you're part fighting. That's really good against the metagame that largely consists of Mew VMAX and Arceus V-Star. And you really want to hit for weakness whenever possible. Throw in a couple single prize card Pokemon in general, and this build's good to go. So I would recommend giving this deck a try. I think it's super cool. If you enjoy playing this deck, that's awesome. I do think this deck is going to fall off. Proceeding towards the future weeks. It seems like, I don't want to be like giving off anything too much, but this deck has placed higher than Gengar for what it's worth, and I do think that Gengar is a better deck than this core. However, I think players are just experimenting right now, and Gengar is not always the best deck to play, so this deck might be more neutral, and maybe that's where my fault comes from. I think this deck might be more neutral than Gengar, not better than Gengar, but it might be more appropriately placed in the metagame than Gengar is at times. Starbirthing into number 8 and moving on up from number 18 last week is Arceus VSTAR Galar Birds. Now, this is the deck that Nick Moffitt and Ian Robb brought to Salt Lake City, and it's been going up and down. I've changed a couple things, and I've added like cast form because this deck seems to me like it's part Dark Toolbox vibes and things like that, where you can get the Inteleon and the Moltres and the cast. It seems to be working out like that. The goal of this deck is to be an Arceus deck when you want to be an Arceus deck, and that's really good because you can just go Arceus on your Arceus. The line's a little bit small, but that's cool. And if they go Arceus, because if they go into an Arceus war, I should say, you could drop Zapdos and then basically win, and then they could try to knock out Zapdos, then you go Clara and knock them out. This deck can use Clara over and over again to use things like Galarian Moltres V, or even Arceus against appropriate matchups, while using quick shooting, shady dealings, all that kind of good stuff. It's a really interesting build of the deck, and I think it's just because it's difficult to play. Also, it might just be less consistent than just Arceus Inteleon. So I think those are really the two factors that I continuously go back and forth on are, is this deck too hard to play, or is this deck less consistent than Arceus Inteleon, or is it a combination of both? I think that's probably what it is, but it's just a toolbox of Galarian Moltres V, Zapdos V, and Arceus mixed with an Inteleon line, and you're good to go. I think that this deck is a deck that will eventually fizzle out a little bit, just as players favor Arceus and Inteleon and we get more robust Arceus decks. This deck's a great deck so far. I think that there's just like, we might see it transform into something different because there's a lot of stuff going on here, in my opinion. Splashing into number 7 and falling from number 5 last week is Suicune V with Ludicolo. Now, this is based off the deck that came second place at Salt Lake City Regionals, and the goal here is to be using Blizzard Rondo with Melanie. So very similar to Ice Rider, except you have access to Ludicolo now. They're using Enthusiastic Dance to increase your damage output by 100 damage, which could be absolutely fantastic to get those knockouts. So you could go Blizzard Rondo, Enthusiastic Dance, even Enthusiastic Dance a second time with Scoop Up Nets and Rare Candies in order to hit those numbers. This deck does not play any boss's orders, it plays Cross Switcher, so you can kind of swoop in with that Shady Dealings Inteleon, Cross Switcher, bring up whatever you want, and play Melanie the same turn, and really hit for a knockout. I think this deck is incredibly interesting. However, it is difficult to play. It's relatively combo heavy, so I do think it is going to stay within the top 10. It could eventually slip out of the top 10 in a couple weeks, just because this is how Suicune Ludicolo has always been in the past. But I do think it is a valid deck for sure, and if you do want to play a Melanie-based deck, this might just be the best kind of pure Melanie-based deck. Hopping into number 6 and not making the list last week, and last week's list finished on Friday with the Shuffle Squads thing, so kind of the half week. So Jolteon was not having a very good half week, but it definitely popped up a little bit towards the end of the week at Sao Paulo Regionals, and this deck's absolutely electrifying. I know, I'm the worst with the puns. Max Thunder Rumble is going to be doing 100 damage to the active, and it's doing 100 damage to the bench Pokemon too, if that Pokemon has a damage counter to it. You can get that damage counter with Quick Shooting, Zigzagoon, Scoop of Net, Zigzagoon. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of ways to make that happen, and that's what makes this deck strong. You go Path to the Peak to lock your opponent. You got Marnie, and those are really the disruptive vibes. If they hit you hard, you can go Cheryl if they don't entirely knock you out. And the best thing about Cheryl is that you have Elemental Badge here, which makes Max Thunder Rumble cost effectively 1 Lightning and 1 Elemental Badge. Cheryl does not discard the Elemental Badge. It only discards the energy, so you can just slap on another energy and you're good to go with Jolteon. I do find that Jolteon is well positioned right now, and a lot of players are not giving credit. I mean, hey, I picked up almost the full Jolteon deck the other day at my local game store, so it's one of those things where I do think it's valid. I paid the price, just missing 2 Jolteon Vs. If you got them, holla at your boy. That being said, it's one of those things with Jolteon VMAX, I find it's much better against weaker players, and that's not to say that players who lose to Jolteon are weak. I just find that Jolteon often loses in the hand, like it loses to a strong Mew player. It quite often loses to a lot of stronger players. This deck takes advantage of players who have not played against Jolteon recently, or generally who could use like a little buff here or there. No shame at all to that, but it is one of those things where is Jolteon more or less of just like a sneaky deck, and we've seen things like that, like Durant, they catch the meta off guard, then they do very well. Or is Jolteon a legitimate choice in the metagame? We'll have to find out as the metagame progresses. I do think it's partially a legitimate choice, and I do think this deck is well appropriately positioned in the top 10. It's just more of a thing like, if players are looking for a deck to choose for EUIC, is Jolteon a valid choice? I mean, all choices are valid. This one might not be as competitive as other decks from here on out. Fluffing it up at number 5, and definitely a deck that I did not expect last week to be making it to number 5, Whimsicott VSTAR. This deck actually was number 9 in kind of the hot picks on Friday for the Shuffle Squads video, and it boosted up even more. Whimsicott VSTAR is all about using its attack. I believe it's Tricky Wind. It's a little bit fuzzy to me. It's still a brand new deck in my eyes. To go Psychic, double colorless, stopping your opponent from attaching special energies. Considering most decks play special energies right now, that's probably a good thing. Pairing it with Crushing Hammer, Fan of Waves, all that good stuff, you're ripping those energies off your opponent's Pokemon, and they have almost no way to attach energies at all. Pair that with Path to the Peak, their deck's a little bit slower, and you can just use Barrel to draw cards. I built a similar version of this deck playing Inteleon a couple weeks back, but this build inspired from who I believe is Thomas Harvey and Cyrus Davis. It's one of those things where I do think Bibarel is a much better option just using its industrious Incissor's ability to continuously draw cards. I did have an Yveltal into this deck because I do think that Cry of Destruction is a very solid attack, especially if your opponent does get off that turn 1 Elisa's playing Mew. You might be able to pivot into this attack. Might not necessarily, like it's a card that I might cut out of the deck. I'm also debating adding in Fog Crystal, extra Quick Balls, but if you are a YouTube channel member or a Patreon member, if you recently Patreon or thing, DM me and I'll get you your thing, or connect your account on Patreon and YouTube. I do have updated lists all the time, so I will be actively working on this deck because I do think that this deck's the real deal. I played it, tested it for like maybe 3 hours last night. Been absolutely loving this one. So if you haven't already, go to your local game store, pick up Whimsicotts before they spike up a little bit. You'll thank me later. Go to atlastcg.com, plug in code ZELASAGE, get them before they're later. And they're already spiking online, so go to ptcgostore.com, plug in code ZELASAGE5. Get those codes right now. Build Whimsicott before this deck does creep up. I do think this deck has the potential to do very well at EUIC, and you're just blocking special energies. We see how these mid-range control decks really can take off, and I mean, we already saw some kind of stroke of genius at Sao Paulo Regionals where a similar deck like this with Arceus VSTAR did end up making top 8 at that event as well. Whimsicott's the real deck. I wouldn't have never thought about it, but it's a real deck right now. Maybe our format has a few more stones to turn over and double check to see if there's any other real decks hiding under there. Pick up Whimsicotts, they're great. Rapid Striking it up at number 4, and dropping from number 3 is Rapid Strike Malamar. Now, I did say that I called that Rapid Strike Malamar could definitely fall off a little bit because it was our number 2 deck at one point, and now it's fallen all the way to number 4. I mean, it's still very respectable for a single prize card deck to hit up this hard. It is difficult to play Rapid Strike Tentacles and just kind of rip all those Rapid Strike cards from your hand. We've recently even saw at Sao Paulo Regionals, there was a player who was trying to turn Drizzile into a Rapid Strike Drizzile on stream. Now, no hate towards that player or anyone who played at Sao Paulo Regionals, but it is one of those things where this deck is confusing to play, it is incredibly difficult, and sometimes you just miss a key piece of the combination. Sometimes you're trying to hit 8 to get that knockout on a Mew VMAX because it does 40 damage times, 4 times 8 is 32, add a 0, 320 damage. That's how much you need to knock at a Mew VMAX. Now, if you are trying to knock at a Mew VMAX and you only have 7, yeah, it sucks, you missed it. And that's really the issue about Malamar. I find similar to Suicune Ludicolo, as much as this deck is a very skill-based deck, and it is incredibly difficult to pilot. You can just miss a piece as well in the process, and I don't think a lot of players realize that. So while Malamar can take you there to the top, I also think that other decks are starting to counter it as well. Like, you might be adding an extra single prize card Pokemon. We might be seeing things like Arceus Inteleon, just like being able to go over this deck, and you know what I'm saying? Like, there's just things that go over this deck. So I think as Malamar continuously positions itself as a top deck, it might receive a little bit of hate because no one likes losing to single prize card decks, period. I don't know what it is. There's just this stigma. Players do not like losing to single prize card decks. They often dislike these decks more than the actual best decks in formats, Mew. And it's one of those things where they will counter these decks out of the format. I know that in my Gengar deck personally, have been putting in more Pekos and stuff like that just to beat Malamar, not even to beat Mew at that point. So keep that in mind. Malamar might get countered out of the format a little bit. We'll have to see how it goes. Skyscrapering over the rest of the competition and absolutely starbursting into success is Duraludon VMAX with Arceus VSTAR coming in at number 3, moving on up from number 4. So basically swapping spaces with that Malamar deck. And this deck's cool because it's doing the same thing as like Whimsicott in a way where you're really punishing your opponent for playing special energies. And I think that's great. So Skyscraper is the main ability in this deck. And you're going to be your opponent's Pokemon that have special energies attached to them. They don't do damage to the Duraludon VMAX at all. So that's one thing, one way to take care of that. Use Arceus VSTAR, accelerate energies to your Duraludon VMAX. Or you can also use Arceus V's Trinity Charge, accelerate energies to your Duraludon VMAX. And really, you could, even if you get Duraludon VMAX with Single Strike Mustard, that's cool too. You have a bunch of healing cards like Big Charm, Crystal Cave, Hyper Potion, all that stuff that can definitely load on some HP, heal some HP, all that kind of good stuff. And you just want to become more of an attacking control tank deck. That's really where it is. Any damage that your opponent does, you're just going to be healing off. It's absolutely great. And I do think this is the type of deck that can just like stay around as players take out special energies of their deck. Like you might see Mew sometimes play 3 double turbos. You might see Mew sometimes play 2 psychic energies and a double turbo. It's one of those things where you often have to look at your opponent, like look at how the metagame's shaping up in order to be playing decks like this and playing decks like Whimsicott. So we'll have to see as it goes, as the format goes on. But if special energies start high, Duraludon's up there, but it might be on the way out after that immediately. However, I do think this is going to stay within the top 10 decks for the foreseeable future. Starbirthing into number 2 for the past seemingly forever, and chilling at 790 CP is Arceus VSTAR Inteleon. Now this is kind of the most consistent version of Arceus decks because you are using Arceus to accelerate Arceus, Starbirth out whatever cards you want for any situation, and you can see my list is built to beat Mirror with Zapdos, Fighting Energies, Clara. You can use Sydney against Mew to take out their counters to Pat to the Peak. You have Sharon's Care to heal your Pokemon, and of course you have Palpat to kind of roll through the rest of the metagame. Like, you can get back those things, and Sharon's Care, Sydney again, all that good stuff. To me, Arceus VSTAR is probably, it's just the most consistent deck, I'd say. And it's not necessarily always going to win events. I think that Mew is kind of that deck, and I don't want to give out any surprises, but anyways, I think that Mew is one of those decks that can just sometimes high roll games and absolutely dominate matchups like this before the game even really starts. Turn 1 Meloetta can just be like, cool, you lose. It's kind of like when you're at the casino and you get that like random like reroll bonus or like 10 free games. That's how Mew feels to me as a deck, whereas this deck just seems like a normal Pokemon TCG deck that is absolutely like, it's fine. It's the best fine deck, if that makes sense. It just has a bunch of options. You can play it well. It's gonna set up. It's all that good stuff. Like, well-constructed decks are going to do well. Decks that have decent damage output are going to do well. This deck seems to hit all the categories across the board. It's just not as crazy as other decks, in my opinion. So I think that's one of those things where slow and steady wins the race. This similar deck just won Sao Paulo Regionals. I'm going to probably be updating this deck a little bit soon because I've been rolling with the same build, but I do want to see how some other inspired lists have come out, and I will be checking those out and seeing how this deck, and I think I'm going to play this deck on the channel this week as well, seeing how it goes. But I think this deck relatively is going to stay within the top 3-4 decks for the foreseeable future. I don't really see anything that changes. When decks start adding tech like Duraludon and the Galar birds and all that kind of stuff, that's what takes away from the core of the deck. You're allowed to have a tech here or there. You can see I have the Zapdos, but it is one of those things where more pure decks typically do better at the top. Over-teched decks are sometimes good for one event, but not every single event. So keep that in mind. This is a more pure form of Arceus than any other Arceus build. That's the reason why it's seeing the most success. Cross Fusion striking at #1 and previously #1 for like the past 5 months or so. 990 CP, you can see it's getting closer to that second place spot, not necessarily like ahead by a few thousand miles. It is one of those things where Mew VMAX up at the top continuously. You can use Cross Fusion Strike, copy anything like Mew V, Psychic Leap, you can copy Max Miracle, Cross Fusion Strike, Melodious Echo, Glistening Droplets even, like you got options. And Psychic Leap's great if you have one of your Pokemon that's kind of damaged, like a Mew VMAX that's kind of damaged. Very helpful against single prize card decks. Max Miracle goes through anything, even Duraludon VMAX's Skyscraper ability. Cross Fusion Strike is probably that big attack that you're going to be using, or Techno Blast I should say, is going to be doing 210. You could always use some damage modifiers with it, and you can kind of attack with that out of nowhere. And you also have Melodious Echo, so if you have a few Fusion Strike energies in play, that might just be hot. And of course, I've used Glistening Droplets just to snipe off an Inkay out of nowhere and steal games with that card. That's probably the sneakiest attack. We have ways to bring up whatever Pokemon you want. Alice's Sparkle allows you to accelerate energies. Rotom, like you can stack your deck, search for whatever you want, do extra damage, get back energies, attach kind of multiple energies. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many good things about Mew. And I think that as our format goes on, Mew seems like it does pretty well against most of the decks in the top 10. So counter decks like Gengar have kind of died out of the format, and Arc Malamar and all that kind of stuff. They're just not really seeing as much play, which is the reason why Mew is continuously sitting on top. Mew to me is the best deck by far, and it will only not be the best deck when it gets countered out of the format. So if we see a large influx of Gengar decks, and if we see a large influx of like Malamar, just like dark decks in general that play Path to the Peak, this deck can struggle a lot. So if you want to beat Mew, play Path to the Peak, play Weakness, do all those things. That's how it's going to stop Mew. Otherwise, Mew is virtually unstoppable. There are a few cute ways to get around this deck, like Duraludon VMAX, and maybe even like the Whimsicott deck. Both of those decks are ways to like maybe hurt some portions of it, but they also do have things that block special energies or things like that. So keep that in mind. I do think Mew's going to stay within the #1 to #2 decks for the foreseeable future. We might see a day where Mew does become #2. Right now, I don't necessarily see it for the foreseeable future. Just with the way the metagame's going, it would have to be purely from a lack of play standpoint. But otherwise, it is truly the #1 deck in the format based off of results and personal testing. And that's what we got going on with this list today. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing all of these decks. I know a lot of y'all aren't necessarily a fan of Mew at the top, but as you can see, Mew is getting closer and closer and closer to that #2 spot. It's not that huge 1000 CP jump. And before I get asked in the comments, I usually get 1 to 2 people who ask every single week. CP is basically the calculated results between in real life and online events that I can observe in the past week or so. That being said, I come up with a system that gives some kind of kicker value per amount of participants and placement at those events. So that's how these are mathematically formed. So these are based off pure results, no opinion, no nothing. And that's really like, it's just the absolute result of the global metagame. So, well, that's the best way that we deal with it. But yeah, we got Mew on top for like the past 4 or 5 months. Absolutely been crushing it. And I think that we're going to see Mew. It's possible that we might see Mew drop to the #2 deck at some point. A lot of players are experimenting, and it's going to be a really interesting metagame. But that's what we got going on in our Brilliant Stars metagame for this week. Stay tuned for more great content on this week. I took a little bit of a few days off in the past week to kind of refresh, and I feel so much better. My mind was really clouded, and I was overworking myself to a point where like I wasn't enjoying creating content. I'm back. I'm going to create better content. And that's what our goals are right now. I have a lot of other things that are on my to-do list, including, I think I want to get back into streaming a little bit. Not sure if that's going to be here or if it's going to be on Twitch or however it's going to be, but it's going to be exciting nonetheless. And I'd love some feedback from that as well. If anyone wants to spark a discussion in the DMs and the comments, totally love to hear back from all y'all. That'd be great. And yeah, like I said, you can always go to ptcgeostore.com, plug in code ZELASAGE5 to save 5% on your next order of codes. AtlasTCG.com, plug in code ZELASAGE8 to save on your next order of Pokemon TCG singles. And coaching from me personally at metafy.gg/@ZachLasage. Totally would love to help you on your Pokemon journey. It's the thing that I'm putting my most passion and effort into right now. So totally hit me up if you are going to any regionals, playing in any online events, or you're just generally trying to improve as a player. Totally love to work with you. Seriously, it's one of those things that coaching is my passion right now. And I've been putting a lot of effort into my clients. So that's why I've been a little bit like, I don't want to be like I'm a little bit tired, but I do like to put in as much effort for my clients as possible. So hopefully I get to pick up a few of you. That'd be absolutely awesome to hang out with a few more of you and help you on your journey. That being said, I'll catch up with all y'all later. Peace out. No more rambling, Zach. Have a great day. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. It means the world to me. And my goal with this channel is to spread my love of the game and knowledge with our entire Pokemon TCG community. If you haven't already, help signal boost this video to other Pokemon TCG fans by liking it, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the channel. Hopefully we reach our goals really soon. Check out this recommended video, and have yourself a great day. Thanks.